Psychology tries to explain why we think, act and feel the way we do, and it does it in a way that goes beyond everyday common sense understanding. But is it a science? Is psychology a science? Is quite a common but complicated question, so the first thing is to make it simpler. And the best way of doing this is to show the examiner that you've got a good understanding of what science is and what makes scientific knowledge different from other forms of knowledge. And once you can do that, you're well on the way to giving a good psychology and science answer. And a key word that can help us here is objectivity. Objective knowledge is knowledge that goes beyond opinions, feelings, values, beliefs and prejudices. In everyday language, it's going from what I think or believe to what I know and can support with evidence. And scientific methods are seen as the best way of producing objective knowledge. So how does science do this? Well, the best way to explain that is to identify the key characteristics of science. And here are some of them to get you started. Science is characterized by measurement, the assignment of numbers to objects, events and processes. Correlations, that is establishing statistical relationships between things. Causation, manipulating data to show that one thing is the consequence of something else. And scientists usually do this through experiments. Reliability, that is, the same results can be obtained under similar conditions, and this then gives science predictability. The data does what it's expected to do. However, don't confuse science with truth, because a scientific explanation that seems true today can be falsified tomorrow with new data, or with a better explanation of existing data. And here you can bring in Karl Popper's idea that what makes something scientific is not that it's true, but that in principle it's falsifiable. But is psychology scientific? Does it fit these criteria? Well, there's no simple answer to this question, so don't try to give one. It all depends on the questions the researcher's asking and how they go about trying to answer them. And the best way to illustrate this in an exam is with real psychological research studies. For example, you could use Eleanor Maguire's study of London taxi drivers. Here she compared their brains to those of controls and found that the taxi drivers had greater grey matter volume in the posterior hippocampus. And this is a good example to illustrate a scientific approach in psychology. There was measurement, correlation, and causation was imputed. The taxi drivers' constant navigation changed their brain structure. There was reliability. The study can be replicated, and this gave predictability. But not all questions in psychology can be answered this way, particularly questions that involve looking at people's behaviour and experiences in particular situations. For example, there's Philip Zimbardo's Stanford prison study, where he randomly allocated students to prisoner or guard roles and observed the effects. Although it's sometimes called an experiment, it didn't have the characteristics of science. There was no measurement as such, no correlations, no clear demonstration of causation. It lacked reliability, and there was no predictability. No certainty the same thing would happen again. Indeed, Haslam and Reicher's BBC prison study had very different results from Zimbardo's. So, giving a really good answer to a psychology and science question, well, first of all, don't commit yourself to a yes or no approach. Don't be afraid to say there's no clear and simple answer to this question. Show you know what's meant by science and identify some of its key characteristics. And from that basis, demonstrate with good examples how psychology sometimes follows a scientific approach and sometimes it doesn't. And sometimes it's halfway between the two. Conclude by showing the examiner that whether a study adopts a scientific approach depends on the question the researcher is asking and the best ways of answering it. Some questions, particularly in biological psychology, are much better tackled in the laboratory. But for other questions, researchers sometimes have to leave their offices and laboratories and get out into the real world and see what's going on for themselves. And while this can give much greater ecological validity, it means that a strict scientific approach is not always possible. So, thanks for watching. And if you're studying other issues in psychology, then you'll find more Shortcuts revision clips on this and other topics at shortcutstv.com.